Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Thank you so much, Darla, for agreeing to come on the Always Andy's Mom podcast. I really look forward to talking today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So why don't you just start out by talking to us a little bit about your son, Ray?
Sure. So my son was feisty and stubborn and just the right amount of, mischief to make him interesting, but not dangerous. He was also kind and thoughtful and a really good friend, always looking out for the underdog, super nice, loyal, good friend to his younger sister, Martha.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of had this knack for bringing people together with his personality, very positive energy, and a wonderful sense of humor. So he was the best thing he could do. The thing that made him the happiest is making people laugh. And, I kind of think there's show-offs in this world and there are entertainers, and there's a big difference. So show-offs to me want to get attention from themselves, while entertainers perform to make other people happy. And Ray was an entertainer. In fact, if he hadn't heard me laugh, say a day went by, he would up the game and do something ridiculously funny, and I'd crack up and he'd say, "I still got it, Mom. I can still make you laugh." That was his goal. So he was, and I think, you can probably think of at least one person in your life, and probably all your listeners can think of someone who has that positive energy, and you just want to be around them. And if that same person has a lot of challenges in their life and they still bring their A game and make other people happy, that makes them just a little more exceptional. And Ray's challenges came in the form of cystic fibrosis. So if you don't know what that is, it's a hereditary disease. It's a life-threatening illness. And there's a defective gene that creates thicker and stickier than normal mucus, which can wreak havoc on the body in a number of ways. Most concerning is the digestive system and the respiratory system. So that thick mucus starts to block things, and it blocks the release of digestive enzymes that you need to break down your food and use the nutrients in our food. So slow growth and malnutrition is oftentimes the indicator that leads to a diagnosis of CF. And that was the case for Ray. And it didn't happen for maybe a year and a half. And I kept telling his pediatrician, "I think something's wrong. Everything just seems to go straight through him. And I feed him all the time. And he's just low on the growth chart. And it was kind of slipping down." And he would always minimize it, like, "Well, try a different formula." Or sometimes, when kids are teething, they'll have loose stools or, this or that. And I said, I just, in my heart, I just feel like there's something wrong. This doesn't seem normal. And so he was about a year and a half, and his doctor said, "I think there is a malabsorption problem. I'm going to schedule a test." We called it a sweat test for cystic fibrosis. And I hadn't really even heard what that was. Maybe I've heard the name, but I didn't know what it entailed. And so I asked him, I said, "Well, what is cystic fibrosis?" He goes, "Well, we're just going to rule out the worst and we'll go from there." And he just scurried out of the room. And I thought, and I'm sitting there with Ray, and he said, drops that bomb and leaves. And I'm like, how bad is cystic fibrosis if it's the worst? And what's a sweat test? I don't even know what that is. And I went up to the receptionist to make the appointment, And he had scribbled something on the top of this form, and I bring it up to her, and she looks at it, and her little cheery smile just faded. And I go, what? And she goes, do you know what CF is? I said, I'm not sure. He didn't tell me. He just said we have to rule out the worst. And she goes, let's hope so. It's not good. And
Oh
so
my goodness. I'm so
that's,
sorry because
yeah,
I'm a pediatrician. I don't know if I had told you that,
yeah,
but I am a
yeah.
pediatrician. This is what I do. And this
So
is
you
handled
know
so
what this,
badly.
so she
Oh, wow.
actually asked me to follow her, and she took me into like a storage little closet and started whispering, like, do you know what CF is? And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Just tell me what it is. And she goes, it's a genetic disease. It affects the digestive and the respiratory systems. The life expectancy is late teens, early 20s at best.
Yeah.
And we just walked
Because
back to
what year was this?
1990.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So
it must have been. They're much better now. Much.
Yes. So that was my introduction, and it was pre-internet. I somehow drove, I don't know how, I was just like devastated. And I went to our neighborhood library and looked up in a medical journal to see what this was. So that is hanging over your head when your child has an illness that has a life expectancy attached to it. You pay more attention. I just watched so closely because I thought, is this my time with him? Yeah. And then I'll back up with the respiratory system. So he got diagnosed because of the slow weight gain. The mucus can start clogging the airways, and that is a nice little breeding ground for bacteria, which leads to lung infections, which leads to scarring of the airways and lung damage. And to combat that, my son breathed in nebulized medications, and then my husband and I took turns literally pounding the snot out of him. We would cup our hands and pound on his chest, his back, his sides in an effort to break up that mucus so he could cough it up and spit it out. So it's very glamorous. And I've got
now they've got big fancy vests that you wear.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was Ray was probably 6, 7 years old when that came out. And his CF doctor, his pulmonologist from the U of M, was one of the co-creators of the airway clearance machine. So instead of pounding, he slipped into a vest that's had hoses that hooked to an air compressor, and that just blasted air against his chest. So pulsating, and he didn't like either one of those things.
I'm sure not. It's not fun.
A year and a half, he has no idea why we're doing this. I can't explain it. So his really easygoing personality, he turned into a fighter. And I remember one of the respiratory therapists in the hospital, because he was hospitalized for about a week to run tests and then for my husband and I to learn how to care for him. He goes, I've never seen anyone this young fight so hard against the treatments. And he goes, he's going to need it. He's going to be a fighter. He's going to need it to manage CF. And I'm like, yeah, but it's really hard on us. But it was non-negotiable. I was a stickler for the treatments. And 5 years after Ray was born, we had our daughter Martha, and she too was diagnosed. So with every pregnancy, you have a chance of passing down those defective genes. So she was diagnosed as well. And I think that was a common denominator that brought a brother and a sister especially close. They had this really, really tight bond. And they were just in cahoots, they were just wonderful together, but also just on every adventure and misadventure in our neighborhood. They were kind of the ringleaders, and just had a lot of fun. And I think the thing I was most proud of, besides they were just decent human beings, they never allowed anyone to identify them by their illness. nobody knew what went on behind closed doors. Much of what we did to care for them was private. And not that we were ashamed, but it was a procedure that it's a workout. You have to like do some huffing and coughing, and so that we needed to be focused on that. And so nobody knew that Ray and Martha, what they had to go through before they met their friends at the bus stop when they went to school, or in the summer
Right.
when they would play in the neighborhood. Nobody really got an inside look. So my book, Muddy Thursday, I kind of swing that door wide open. And it was very important to me to bring some awareness to CF because it only affects about 30,000 people in the United States. So it's not well known, or it's misunderstood, or like myself, I had to go look it up in a journal, a medical journal. So a lot of what they went through, it just, their friends didn't quite know. And since my book came out, even our closest neighbors, they're like, I thought we knew, and there's so much we didn't know. And so that was an important aspect of putting that into the book. So at the age of 12, I don't know, should I go into that?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So he was just the friendliest, just had a ton of friends, just a vivacious, wonderful kid. And so the night he passed away, he received his first communion. We had gone to church, and Martha, his sister, decided to stay back. Her friend had invited her to go see a movie. So she was with her friend. And then when we came back, we had dinner as well with my parents, and we pulled into our driveway, and I said, hey, Ray, why don't you go down and get Martha from the neighbors, just 3 houses down. And he goes, yeah, okay. And he started to take off running through our front yard. And at the last second, he kind of turned over, looked over his shoulder at me, and he said, hey, do you want to race me? And he had already taken off. And I said, well, I guess not. You took off without me. Those were his last words to me. Do you want to race me? And my last words to him is, you already took off without me. And he never came back. Like, I'm waiting around, and I went inside. I'm talking to my husband for a minute. He got a phone call, and at the time, he's retired now, but he was a St. Paul police officer. So by the nature of the conversation, I thought he's talking to a coworker, and I could just kind of whisper to him, I'm going to go down to the neighbors and thank them for watching Martha. And, they didn't
figure
come
out
back.
what's going on.
Yeah. And I figured, knowing Ray, he's in there, bragging about drinking wine. He had his first communion. It's like, I drank wine tonight. So I walked down, and in the corner of my, caught my attention. There was just something kind of dark. It was night, it was dark out, and there was like a dip in the yard of the neighbors, so kind of low. And I kind of glanced over and didn't quite figure out what it was. And as I got closer, it was Ray lying in the grass. And he was a prankster, like always pulling pranks on everyone. So I thought I could just picture him going, here comes mom, let's scare her. Because I figured Martha was somewhere near him as well. So I just like sauntered up to him, and, there was nothing in me that went, oh my gosh, this is a medical emergency. Nothing in me, which that was a guilt thing that I still deal with. It's like, how could I not know that my son was in trouble? And I actually walked up to him and went, okay, you can never beat me in a stare down. I said, I know you're going to laugh. And I got a closer look at him, and he was still holding still, but he had like a slight smile on his face, and his eyes were, I thought, oh, they're not even flickering. He's doing a really good job of being still. And it wasn't until I reached down and touched his shoulders, and I'm like, he's out cold. And I even at that point, I go, okay, joke's over. I'm going to call 911 if you don't get up. And then I touched him and went, oh my gosh, I ran to the neighbors to their front door. and said, Ray collapsed in your yard, call 911. And then I went back to him, and I don't know why, I just panicked, where I thought, I have to get Rusty, my husband. It's like, he's a police officer. He's done, CPR and whatever. I'm like, I got to get Rusty. I got to get Rusty. I just have to get help. And it felt really wrong to run away from him. But when I looked back, our neighbor guy, Ken, was with Ray, and his wife was on the front doorstep with the phone in her hand. So I thought, my bases are covered. Somebody's with Ray, somebody's getting medical help. And I ran home, and, probably days went by when I said, Rusty, what did I say to you? I don't remember his one word. He just went, Ray. And I ran back out the door, and Rusty passed me, just bolted. And then I heard Ken, our neighbor, say, he's not breathing. And, my husband tried to revive him. And it was quite a long time. I can't tell you if it was 1 minute or 5 minutes, but it felt like eternity before the medics arrived. And, he just couldn't be revived. So we, with CF, that's not what happens. It's a progressive, slow thing where your, airways, the lung damage or whatever. I mean, this was not CF related. And I could not, I'm like, what just happened? How can, I just saw him running. He was fine. And my son was an athlete. You name a sport, he played it. He played hockey, basketball, baseball. He was a skier, a swimmer, a golfer. He earned about black belt in karate by the time he was 10. So he was physically fit, which was really good for his lungs. And he had a checkup maybe a month before, and they always listen to his heart, listen to his chest. It's like, he's never, it was a arrhythmia, ARVD, arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. And it's the kind of thing you probably heard of young athletes that just drop on a basketball court and they can't be revived. It's just a sudden electrical failure, basically. But when I talked to his doctor, we I say it was a mysterious death, because I feel like if you have to have an autopsy to find out how somebody passed, it's a mystery. And we just could not figure out how this happened. And his doctor said it would, because I had the guilt of, if I had done something right away, would the outcome be different? Because it's immediate. It's just, and he said it's usually males, usually not as young as Ray, maybe in their 20s, and athletes.
Or teens, like, late teens.
So, everything you'd think with CF, and then we get blindsided by something else. I always had this hope of medical advancements, and things are going to get easier. And so there was this number attached, but always hope attached as well. And then we get blindsided by something else. And he worked so hard to stay healthy. I mean, every day. And those respiratory treatments I talked about, they lasted about 45 minutes. And we did them twice a day on both of our kids, morning and night. If they were exhibiting more symptoms, producing more mucus than normal, we upped those treatments to 3 or 4 times a day. So I think of cystic fibrosis as kind of the epitome of a life interrupted. Every day is interrupted by those treatments. And if those at-home treatments fail, then they're pulled out of life altogether. And there's a hospital stay involved with PICC lines for IV antibiotics. But every moment in between those best treatments was golden. And, I had the rule of you can't skip the treatments, but the next rule was just as important. Have fun. Go have fun. And, I'm not going to have you do chores and, sort your sock drawer when you've just sat through a treatment and tethered to a machine. So it was a free for all in between. And, to have that pulled, blindsided. I think the first thing my husband said in the hospital when they said there's nothing more we can do for him. And my husband's a big guy, and he just kind of draped himself over our son, and he goes, "You worked too hard for this. You worked too hard for this to happen." So we lose this wonderful boy. And then my daughter, that's her only sibling. And so my story comes through as all of a sudden there's this little girl by herself, and not only her only sibling, her best friend, her partner in crime.
Yeah, I was thinking the same term, actually.
Yeah, and the only other person she knew that had CF. They had each other. So I think one of the saddest visual images that has stayed with me all these years is her doing her treatments by herself. If somebody came to the door and asked Ray to play and Martha was still doing her best treatments, he'd say, "I'll come see you a little later. I'll come out, I'll meet up with you later." And he'd come back in the house and stay with Martha till she was done with hers. So they had this partnership. And to see her doing that by herself, I just remember thinking, you are in for the fight of your life on your own. You're going to have to get tough. The sidekick isn't there. And he championed for her. Like, sometimes I just think, where did he come from? How did this kid, for instance, when he was 10 years old, he started falling off the growth chart again, like really low in weight. And his CF doctor cut a deal with Ray because he protested there was talk of getting a feeding tube. So he'd have supplemental feedings at night and then get through the day as usual, eating his meals and whatever. But his body just needed more than he could take in. And his doctor cut a deal because Ray's like, "No way, I'm not going to get this." And he said, "If you drink these weight gain shakes every day, you come back in a month. If you gain at least 3 pounds, we'll put it on the back burner for now." Well, Ray would have a hard time gaining 3 pounds in 3 months, much less, 4 weeks. So he didn't make the cut. We were doing the weight gain shakes every day. And I hid the scale claiming that it was broken because I didn't want him to be discouraged. I didn't want to, it was just too much. So we drove to the clinic not knowing what he weighed. And he stepped on the scale and we knew that he knew what number he had to hit. And he just looked down and burst into tears because it was, inevitable that he'd have to get the feeding tube. And it was the beginning of summer. And he said, "Well, when do I have to have it?" And before the doctor could schedule something, my husband jumped in and he said, "You don't have to do it till the end of summer. You enjoy the summer." And so August kind of hung over our head. And I was kind of thinking, "I don't think we're supposed to wait." And he goes, "Let him have one more shirtless summer without this feeding tube in." And so he gets the surgery. And nobody told us that initially it's like a big, long tube. Yeah. And then once it heals, they take that and put it, well, his doctor called it a button.
We all call it a button.
Yeah, it made it sound cute, He goes, "It's like a beach ball valve, you just."
Yeah, it is. It looks like a beach ball valve, but we call it the button.
And, yeah. So, somehow it made it cute. So he comes out of surgery and goes, "Oh no, what is this? Because it was long and he had to coil it up and put it in kind of a mesh girdle type of thing." And he goes, "I wouldn't have signed up for this if I knew it looked like that." And which was typical of Ray. He always, we never pushed him to do anything. All his sports were him deciding. And he'd go, "Hey, my friend plays hockey. Can you sign me up for hockey?" It was always, "Can you sign me up? I want to try this. Can you sign me up?" So it's kind of typical of him to go, "I would not have signed up for this feeding tube if I knew it looked like that." And then the nurses were explaining, no, you'll get this
it's not gonna
big tube taken out, get the button. And we get home from the hospital. I'm doing the first tube feeding at night. And he lifts his pajama shirt up, and we had bunk beds in his room, and Martha would go on the top bunk, and she's kind of hanging over looking at what's going on. And I got the pump, with the feeding the bag and hooking him up. And he rolls up his pajama top and he said, I don't like this thing. I feel like I look like an alien. I don't like it. But if somebody has to have it, I'm glad it's me and not Martha.
Oh.
I just went, who, like, you're 10. I would be like, why couldn't she get it instead of me?
Right.
He would do anything for her. And so that loss, never mind my pain and just, it changed my life. It changed my husband's life. But our daughter was extremely affected because she had to deal with all her complications that compiled as she aged. And I'll get to the good part. She's 28 years old now.
Yeah.
And for the last 2 years, she's been on a drug called Tricafta, and it was a breakthrough drug for CF. Since those 2 years, she's not been hospitalized once with a lung infection, which is unheard of. She's gained 20 pounds that were much needed. She rarely coughs, which is still like, I can't get used to it because I could, if she walked through the door, she was coughing before she said hello. If we went shopping, I knew she was in the shoe department because I could hear her, I could pick her out just from the cough was the introduction to her. And it was all day long. And she'd cough through the night and wake up more like she got beat up instead of rested. And now we rarely hear her cough. She moved back in with us pre-pandemic, which is great. She wasn't isolated. She was safe with us. And we just, it's like a game changer. And so there's so much hope in the CF community now more than ever. It's just changed her life. But from, I'd say 12 years old, things started to, a lot of complications. She developed what we call CF-related diabetes. That mucus is blocking the release of insulin. So, why have one disease when you can have two? She's got CF and diabetes. So she had a lot of hospitalizations. I can't even count how many. I can't count how many PICC lines she's had. Complications from that were like, sometimes they had to pull the line and she didn't get to run the whole course of antibiotics because she'd get a blood clot. There's just a slew of complications. So to see this last 2 years has just been remarkable. But all along the way, I thought Ray would have championed for her. He would have understood her fight. He would have been at her side. So when I look at her, she always looks a little bit lonesome to me. And she has come into her own, and she's super funny. She's tried her hand at stand-up comedy, just like her brother, very compassionate towards other people. And I feel like when you have something yourself that's a challenge and somebody shows you even a small act of kindness, it just goes a long way. I think of all the times that they couldn't go to different events and not go to school. I did my fair share of homeschooling and tutoring because they'd miss weeks at a time. And if somebody reached out, maybe brought a gift or said hello, all those little things meant a great deal to them. And Ray was the same way. And now my daughter, they extend themselves because they just know what even a simple thing means to somebody else. So very compassionate, a lot of empathy for other people, which is remarkable to me when they had their own, issues that could very well be poor me. And I never saw that. I don't think they would have allowed it. They rose above it. So our loss was multifaceted, and I'm sure that's a way for any parent. All the things you miss. I miss his friends. I lost him, and I lost all the connections to the families that he was part of. And and the ones in the neighborhood, you just watch them. their voices changing, and they're
Yeah.
driving, and they're graduating high school, and they're off to college and have careers and families of their own. And one of the, things about writing, I felt like, this is where the story ends when he passed, and nobody else is going to meet him. And so through writing, he didn't get to carry on. I didn't get to see the young man he would have become. I didn't even get to be the mother of a teenage boy. But maybe in a small way, I can carry on for him through my story. And it's been pretty remarkable, people reaching out. And some of them will say, I feel like I got to know Ray. People that don't know, just reviews I see on Amazon or on Goodreads. And that's the one thing I feel like good. I accomplished that when they say, I fell in love with this kid. I got to meet him. I thought, yeah, okay. There's some power in storytelling, and that just means a lot to me. So
Yeah,
that's
just
kind of
beautiful.
been my journey going forward with, and it was, as you know, I fell apart. I struggled. And one thing I didn't do, and maybe should have, I never sought out grief support counseling. And in my mind, I was stubborn and just thought, at the end of the day, there's an empty bedroom. What can you tell me that's going to make me feel better? I just had resigned myself to thinking, I can't fix this, so nobody else can either. Nobody can fix this for me. This is, I have to figure out how to go forward. And I had, wrongly kind of turned away from finding peace and finding what's still left in your world. There's still some beauty in life, and thought, my luck, I'm going to live till I'm 95, and it's going to be a long, miserable life of pain and sadness and heartache. And about 5-6 years out from Ray's death, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, maybe a couple years before that, I said to my husband, I think this is the kind of thing that makes you sick. He goes, what are you talking about? I go, grief. I go, there's nowhere to put it. There's nowhere to release it. I think it festers and it can take you down mentally and physically. And he just shook his head like, where are you getting this? And I go, I just feel like it's in me, and I don't know where to put it. I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't think you can get rid of it. So I just had this, feeling all the time. Yeah. And then sure enough, I get cancer. So it wasn't entirely surprising to me for some reason. I just felt like this can bring you down. And the good thing, if there is any good thing about getting breast cancer, and I used to hate when people would say, well, cancer was like a gift. And I get cancer, and I'm like, really? Because if this is a gift, I'd like to return it. Like, can I exchange this for a trip to Maui or something? But I get what they mean. I get why people say that. It changes your perspective, or, there's some kind of change in your life. And for me, it happened actually my first round of chemo. And I have a chapter in my book called the Chemo Circle. So I'm sitting in this circle of patients we're all tethered to an IV. And I look at each and every one of them, even though it seemed like that was discouraged, that, nobody was looking at each other. But I kind of studied each and every one of them. And I decided I was probably the youngest person in the circle. And that really ticked me off. I thought, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. And then I started thinking, maybe I do. Maybe this is exactly where I belong, because I kept thinking, or at that moment, finally thought, who am I to squander the life I've been given, no matter the challenges? Because that's what I had been doing. Don't get me wrong. I adore my daughter, and I was happy watching her develop, and the time I spent with her, I tried to make as pleasant as possible for my sake, her sake. So there were moments of joy for sure, but overall, I wasn't engaged the way I used to be. And Martha had a different mom and a different dad than she used to have.
Yeah.
Just distraught and sometimes not available, just stuck in your own thoughts. So in that chemo circle, I just thought, I need to pay attention. I need to start living more fully. And that I'd like to think that I'm smart enough not to need a cancer diagnosis to see that, but apparently I needed to get hit over the head. But that was a turning point where I just went, okay, I had my daughter as well, but I had a little boy that he fought and he embraced everything. I thought he lived wholeheartedly. And what a slap in the face that I can't do the same. Even without him, I should look at him as an example and not dismiss all that life and light, and I had this darkness and kind of this aura. I used to tell my friends I must be as pleasant to visit as, a 90-year-old in a nursing care has no memory. I just
Yeah.
thought
You were
if I
stuck. You were stuck.
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
if I couldn't be a better friend, I'm going to lose my friends. So I started
Yeah.
being more aware of working on myself. And
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that fact that you feel like that was a mistake that you kind of made early on, because that is what I'm certainly trying to do, what others are trying to do, is trying to keep people from getting stuck, and that there is hope, and you need to live with hope. I mean, to live
right.
just, that makes me so sad to hear you say, oh, it's just my luck, I'm going to live
Yeah.
till 95. And I know
Yeah.
I've had
Yeah.
those moments too, where I feel like, gosh, and it does still terrify me, the idea of living till 95 and having to live so many more years without my boy. But
Right.
it's just, that's so sad. I mean, it just breaks my heart to hear
Right.
that's what you were thinking, and that I don't need anyone to help me because I'm just going to be this miserable kind of forever.
Yeah.
Right?
I kind of just resigned myself. And like I said, I didn't seek out professional help, but I was really lucky in a few ways where it's almost like the right people came to me, like in a way sought me out. So for instance, we had a neighbor that moved down like at the corner of our street. And I had no idea who she was. She came to raise visitation and introduced herself. I mean, we had never met. And she goes, "You don't know me, but my name is Kay, and I live at the end of your block. And your son was the first to welcome me to the neighborhood." I thought, how long ago? And she goes, 4 years, which would have made him 8. And I thought, you've had a little relationship with Ray for 4 years and I didn't know. And I immediately thought, I'm a crummy neighbor. Like, why didn't I go introduce myself? And I just, that she came out and said, yeah, he was the first to welcome me. So maybe a month later, he died in April. It was Memorial Day. And Martha asked if I would set up a tent in the backyard. Well, it was a tent I bought that Ray never got to use. I mean, he died before we ever went on a camping trip. And in fact, the morning that he was getting ready for school, on his last day, we talked about that tent and all the places we wanted to go. And then Martha asked if I could set it up in the backyard for her and her friends. And I thought, this isn't right. Like, he should be here. And so it was just kind of this gut-wrenching exercise to put that tent up. And I pounded in the last stake and just kind of had a meltdown. And I ran to our front yard and sat on our front porch and just kind of, regrouped. And all of a sudden I see this woman walking up to our house. And I thought, I don't want to talk to anyone. I'm crying. I probably haven't showered. I don't know what I'm wearing. I'm just, kind of a mess. But it was too late. We made eye contact and she's approaching my front steps. I wanted to duck out and get inside. And she just took a uninvited seat next to me. And I kind of thought, what are you doing? And I recognized her when she got closer that she was Kay from the visitation. And she sat next to me and she said, Darla, I would recognize your pain if I saw you walking down the street. I would recognize it if I didn't even know what happened to your family. And I thought, well, what's your first clue? Like, I'm a mess, I didn't say anything, but I was kind of angry that she just plunked herself down and thought that was okay. That's where my head was at. And I said, really? She goes, yeah, because I lost my son. He was 10 years old and he drowned in the St. Croix River. And then I just felt ashamed for what I had been thinking. And it took a while. And I said, how long ago? And to me, she looked to be somewhere in her mid 60s, maybe late 60s. And she said, and I'll never forget this, and it's just rings so true. She said, 1968, yesterday, an hour ago. I go, oh, so yeah, I got Kleenex here. Well, that's how it is. An hour's as good as it gets. I just thought she has to, 1968, this is 2001 when Ray died. How has she been doing it all these years? And so I asked her, I said, what do you believe? Like, how have you done this? And I go, do you believe her son was Stephen? I go, do you think you'll be reunited with him? Do you think you'll see him again? What do you believe? Because everything I believe didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And she said, it was the first time, because I had a lot of people bringing up religion and, God wouldn't want you to be sad, or Ray wouldn't want you to be sad.
Oh,
and
I hate that. I hate that.
think,
it's like, that is not helpful. You just make me feel guilty now too. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, and I'd always think, you don't know Ray. If I wasn't,
right.
He'd go, I could just picture him saying,
like
I died and you're not even sad. Didn't I matter? It's like, when you lose a child, sad is really the only option, like destroyed, really. Or I'd hear, he's an angel. God needed an angel.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
no, I needed him here. That's what I want to say every time.
Right. And my daughter, it's like she knew him better than anyone. And somebody told her, well, Ray's your angel now. And she goes, no, he's not. He's my helpful ghost. And I thought, a helpful ghost is a better way to describe Ray than an angel. So even she thought it was an absurd, notion. And the worst, and I'm sure you've heard this, is, God only gives what you can handle. And I think, I really, and I complained about that to a friend once. And I said, I'm so tired of people saying, God only does what you can handle. And she said, well, quit acting so tough and he'll be easier on you. Like, he's giving you more.
What's so funny is I just had a conversation with somebody about that very verse, and that is completely misquoted. So what that is in the Bible is God doesn't give you more temptation than you can handle. It has nothing to do with pain or sorrow or anything. It only has to do with temptation, and people take it completely out of context and put it with your grief and sorrow and what you've gone through, and it's not at all right. It's totally wrong.
Yeah, one time I went and talked to my minister, and he was the minister the night Ray was getting his first communion. Mm-hmm. And I said, you tell me, why does a child die? Why does a 12-year-old boy die? He goes, I don't know. And I just thought, okay, this guy of all people has no biblical wisdom to bestow on me. And he goes, I don't understand why a 12-year-old boy dies. I don't understand why an 80-year-old woman dies. All I know for sure is your time here is limited. It's but a grain of sand compared to an eternity in paradise. And he goes, I know you're hurting, but how are you going to live? How are you going to spend your short time here? So he switched responsibility on me and not God, which gave me something to think about. But flash forward when I met Kay, and she said, 1968, yesterday, an hour ago, that was like the first time I thought I have to hand it to her. It's the first time I felt like, okay, this makes sense more than any other, advice I was getting religious wise. But I asked her, I said, what do you believe? And she goes, I don't believe God took Stephen and he's in some white, fluffy cloud. That's not my idea of heaven. And she goes, I believe there's a cycle. There's a cycle to life, and you can still see the beauty in the world. I see my son when the sun sets. I see him when I hear beautiful music. And she goes, you will find, beauty in the world. She goes, and I saw him when Ray stood at my door and said, welcome. She goes, I saw my Stephen. And I'm like, so how do you argue that? And I said, we just sat there for a while. And she said, Darla, you can make your own heaven right here. And I kind of asked her, what does that look like? And she goes, you start to extend yourself to other people, and you will find the beauty in this world again. And then she warned me, you can also make your own hell right here on earth. And she said, when she's alone and stuck with herself and aware of every miserable thought she has, that to her is hell. And then she got up and left and said, I'll come visit you another time. And I was left there to think, I am stuck. I am in my own hell. I am stuck with every miserable thought. And I need to change that. And it was probably, a few years later, I ended up with cancer, which really pushed me into the right direction. But I had all these little bits of wisdom that Kay kept coming back and talking to me. So she did pull me in the right direction. And you're not alone. There are people that experience what you experience. And recently, which is, kind of cracks me up, but I was a guest speaker at a support group, grief support group. And I thought, well, this is ironic because I've never, I never sought this out myself. But they wanted to hear about my book, and I just looked around. I thought, I got to commend these people. Like, they were smart enough and vulnerable enough to seek that out. And I got to meet everybody afterwards and had all these wonderful conversations. And I thought, everything I thought this wouldn't be for me, would have been wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I had that really wrong. And so if there's anything, I would encourage other parents to try that, just.
There is so much comfort in being able to be with people who get you and understand you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because without it, I could only, and I don't know if this rings true with you, I could only be with my friends or family for a limited amount of time. Mm-hmm. A limited amount of time where I could fake it.
Right.
Before I had to pull away and just go back to what was bothering me, or what, I couldn't embrace their joy. Like, even Christmas time, it's like, can we do something different? Can we do something in Ray's honor? Do I have to be status quo? And then you feel guilty because it's like, I don't want to ruin your holiday and your joy, but I can't.
But this is too much for me. Yeah.
I'm hurting. Yeah. So I kept, pulling away. Even, soon after he passed, going to the grocery store I'd put something in the cart that only he liked and go, oh, I don't, you put that back on the shelf.
I know.
I more than once left a cart full of food and just ran out of the store. I tell the cashier, I'm like, there's a full cart back there. I have an emergency. I have to leave, and I leave my cart, but I couldn't do what you would normally do and couldn't embrace other people for long periods of time. And little by little that got better, but it's almost like I'm out where he isn't and he was at my home. That's my safety. I need to go home. And
Well, and I think
initially
that's what those other bereaved people can do for you is they just are it's so much safer, I would say, to feel like you are surrounded by those people, because now you don't have to fake it all the time.
Exactly.
I mean, I can get together with other bereaved moms and I can feel like it will be okay if I start to cry. No one will judge me. It will be okay if I start laughing uncontrollably. No one will judge me. Because the other thing is sometimes you feel like you don't want to look too happy because then people will think, oh, yeah, you know what? She's good now. We don't have to worry about her anymore.
Right.
And you don't want that either, right? It's this such a weird, I don't know. I feel like you're walking on this tightrope all the time, not wanting, I don't know. I just feel like then I think about what are people thinking? What are people thinking? And are they thinking I'm totally fine? Are they thinking I'm a mess? Because really I'm somewhere in the middle. And sometimes I am pretty fine. And other times I am a mess. And I wish everyone would know that it's not either or, that I am everything, right? I'm not even somewhere in between. I'm all of it. I'm a mess and I'm fine. So it just depends on the moment.
I have a chapter in my book called Stages of Nothing.
Yeah.
And it's all the different stages. It's like, yeah, okay, I get that there supposedly are stages, but in the end, it didn't matter to me. It's like pain is pain, death is death. I don't care if I'm in the, depression or acceptance or denial, or I didn't feel stages, because to me, that's temporary and you move through these stages. That didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Because like what you're saying, I feel all of it all of the time.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other, or it's a blend of everything all of the time. And you're right. Other parents that have perfectly healthy children and their children are alive, they don't know what we're going through. And, even the things that bothered me that people would say that would make me angry, I think they don't know what to say. So it's to their credit for even trying, but it doesn't help. And had I met with, a group of other moms, that would have been a healthier place for me to be. I see that now. And all I can say is anybody comes after me, at least I can, experience is something after I have experienced what not to do, maybe. I think I can direct a little bit better to go talk to someone who's, even
you don't want the next person to have to get cancer. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Do
to put you where you are right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like I have a voice to help too. And I think through my story, there's power in sharing, and everything I kept so close and didn't talk about has opened a door. And I think when we share our stories, we can enlighten, we can make people think, we can make them feel, we can inspire. It can bring about change. And I'm seeing that now with the feedback I'm getting from other parents who've lost children, or CF families, siblings that have lost, a sibling, and people that have experienced none of this, but resonate with, hey, even I don't have these challenges and I'm not living fully. If Ray can do this, if Martha can do this, they're finding out, I need to pay attention. I need to live more fully. And so if that's the one takeaway from Muddy Thursday, my book, then I've done my job, then I have carried on Ray's legacy in a way, So yeah, it's been powerful, and I feel better where I'm at now. And it's been 20 years, but it's I mean, and it got better slowly over time,
Mm-hmm.
but reaching out, I'm seeing the power in that. And so I know these support groups and what you're doing with your podcast is so beneficial. And so
Well, I
I'm
think it
glad I
just
found
helps.
you.
I'm glad
Yeah.
you found me too. I'm so glad that you wrote. Tell people how they can find the book.
Okay. So yeah, it's available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. And then I don't want to lose sight of the independent bookstores. So it's available to order. And I don't have, it's kind of hard to get a self-published book on a bookshelf. Um,
Uh-huh.
but you could call any or go to any independent bookstore or Barnes and Noble, and they'll order it, and they ship too. So that's another route. But yeah, it's on Amazon, and it's doing well, and I'm getting good reviews, and it just makes me happy, because when you're writing, you have no idea what a
Right.
reader's going to think of it. You're holed up in a room by yourself, and it's like, I think I got the point across, but you know, you just don't know. So to have this wonderful response to it, and people are pulling out what resonates with them, and they're sharing what something meant to them. And I'm like, oh, good. I got, this or that hit,
Yeah.
with someone. So it's been really sweet that way.
Right. And
Yeah.
just bringing a little bit of understanding to people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we all have challenges, but this one's a big one. And
Yeah.
parents that
It is a
have
big
gone
one.
through, they know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you, like, when you lost your son, did you read? Did you? I would look for
I
books. I wouldn't find things that
Oh my goodness, people
necessarily
gave
come
me
up.
so many books. I have stacks of books. I read some books. Rare Bird I loved. I've had
Oh,
that.
okay.
I've had her on the show before. She's fantastic. And Anna Winston Donaldson is her name. And I read
Okay.
some books. We got, believe it or not, 9 copies of one book, Lament for a Son. So I read
Oh,
that book. My husband read it. He really loved it. So anyway, people just gave us books. I felt like that was a common thing, but for me, it was really hard to read most books.
yeah, yeah. I remember when I started writing, I thought, I wonder if there's books written by parents who have lost a child that would, I kind of wanted to see, how do they handle it? How do they
Mhm.
how do they take this topic and write about it? And so I went to Barnes and Noble, and one of the clerks came up to me, and she was, oh, can I help you? And I said, well, this is really specific, but do you have books written by a mom or a dad about the loss of a child? And she had to kind of think, and she goes, well, let's look over here. And she takes me to the spiritual, religious kind of self-help section. And in my sarcastic little brain, I'm walking behind her thinking, I bet there's atheists that have lost children. Like, what do they read? Not that I am, but I was like, okay, this is the section. And, I'm looking at, there wasn't a lot to pick from, but I'm looking at, to figure out what I was going to buy. And then she came back to me. She goes, oh, there's another section. And she takes me to the very back of the store, and it was the grief and bereavement section, and it was more how to. And so she goes, there's only a couple here that were written by parents. And it was kind of, 10 things I learned about grief, or, I thought, well, I'm not I'll leave that to the professionals. I'm not a grief counselor. I didn't write a how-to book. I don't have a degree in theology. I'm not a religious leader. I'll leave that to, somebody who can speak to that. So I'm like, where does my book fit in? And I decided I'm just going to tell my story, and whatever you can take from it. And nobody's more surprised, but there is a religious thread that runs through this. Even the title is a play on words. Muddy Thursday, my son died on Maundy Thursday, the Christian
Mm-hmm.
holy day before Easter,
Mm-hmm.
which commemorates the washing of the feet, communion, and the Last Supper. So I never put this together until I was writing. I mean, Ray died having his, first communion. We met my parents and we had what would be, unbeknownst to us, our last dinner together. And that night, Ray was playing with a group of his friends, and I had to call him home. I go, you got to get ready for church. And he came in the door muddy, like his pants were muddy and his shoes, and he ran into his room to change, kind of like hiding this. And I thought, how did he get so muddy? And didn't have a chance to ask him. And we get up to church, and he's, up to the altar for communion, and he holds his hands out to receive the, body of Christ, and every fingernail's caked in mud. And all I could think is, I never have my act together. I didn't even see to it that my son washed up properly for his first communion. I find out maybe a couple months later, one of the boys he was hanging out with that night, his mom said, did you know what Ray was up to, the night he died? And I said, well, I know he said he was on a scooter and he was in this new development across the way. And so there's all this, mounds of dirt because they were building. And she goes, I'm going to have my son tell you about it. So her son actually wrote a story about that night. They had been playing, and they went and used a porta potty at some point. And when they had like a piece of plywood, because it was muddy and dirty out. So whoever, had set that up, well, Ray slipped off that plywood and, stepped right into the mucky, mud. So his shoes are covered with mud, his socks are wet, and he wants his friend to switch shoes with him. Because my feet are cold and they're wet. Can I switch shoes? And Tyler's like, no, then my feet are going to be muddy and your dirty socks. And he goes, no. And then he dares Ray. He goes, why don't you go up to that house over there and see if they can help you? And Ray goes, okay. So he knocks on a stranger's door and said, hey, my name's Ray. I just live up the block. My shoes are muddy and dirty. Would you happen to have a pair of shoes I could borrow? And the guy goes in and gets a pair of shoes. And then he's sitting on the stoop and he's going to put switch his shoes. And he goes, my socks are wet and my feet are muddy. Do you have any socks I could have? And he goes, okay. He brings out a pair of socks. And then he goes, well, I kind of need to wipe the mud off my feet. So he goes in and gets paper towels. And I never, it was one of the last things I wrote. I'm like, Maundy Thursday.
Yeah.
The washing of the feet, which is a sign of love and humility. And I thought, I can picture him washing his feet that night. Then it's communion, and then it's the Last Supper. And then he dies with his arms wide open, on the cross, or, his position. Yeah. And that all came together. And I thought, okay, that mud was the symbolic of this boy playing hard till the end.
Yeah.
And it also muddied up my psyche, my life. And so that night is Muddy Thursday to me. It's always been this muddy thing, good and bad. And so that's how the title came about.
I love that.
So there's all these weird parallels that came into play. And I flash back to my childhood, and I flash back to my husband's childhood, and all the things that we went through that shaped who we became as parents of two children with a life-threatening illness. And so I kind of believe there's this thread that weaves itself through childhood into adulthood, and piece by piece it kind of shapes us into the people we were meant to be, and you draw on those strengths. And so there's a lot more going on than just some sweet vignettes about a boy. It just expanded into everything that merged, and the meaning behind everything kind of melded into a bigger story. So the time between his death and now, seems like a lot, but like I said earlier, it's actually right on time.
Yeah.
Because it took me a while to find all these hidden meanings, and that religious piece became more vivid to me as time went by.
And gives you more peace too now, doesn't it? Mhm.
Yeah. I fought it for the longest time, and now I'm embracing it.
Yeah.
So there's healing and hope, and
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Darla. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
I enjoyed talking to you too, and I really appreciate what you do, and it's remarkable. And I was looking at your website and all your podcasts, and I can't wait to go through them all. I've only listened to maybe 3 of them so far, so it's going to be a daily podcast with Marcy.
Well, thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. We are always looking for new show ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, know someone who'd be a great guest, or have a show idea, please email us at marcy@andysmom.com. Be sure to visit the webpage, andysmom.com, for more content, including Marcy's blog. There you can also sign up to receive updates via email. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.